Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Wednesday edition of the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. This is a Hey Mary Kay edition of the podcast. We're a day behind because of the Monday after season stuff, locker clean out, all that good stuff. So we're doing this on a Wednesday, which also means we're going to take a break in the middle, and you're going to get to hear from Lance Reisland like you do on Wednesdays. So we got a full look back at the Steelers game. So a packed podcast today here on the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Mary Kay, let's get to it. Our Football Insider subscribers they want to know about the defensive coordinators. So let's just start. I got to start with this question because this comes from Nick, who says he's currently in Turks and is it Caicos Islands? I think so. He's currently in the Turks and Caicos Islands on vacation. And he texted us in a question. So, Nick, of course, we're going to go to your question first. Hey, Mary Kay, which defensive coordinator candidate do you think most aligns with the Browns' defensive players and their talents?
Well, I am just now starting to work through writing some sort of feature stories and taking a closer look at some of these guys. I just got done with one on Jerod Mayo. Now, my problem is whenever I start to dig into the backgrounds of these guys, I don't know that I'd be very good in the hiring process because I fall in love with every one of them. You know, once I start digging in and find out all of their wonderful qualities. And I had a grand old time doing this story on Jerod Mayo and really enjoyed hearing about him and reading about him. And, he comes from the Bill Belichick coaching tree. So to hear how he, back when he was in his second season, the guys would require him to go into Bill Belichick's office. I called it the Lion's Den, to go in there and ask if they could, get out of pads for the second practice or whatever the case may be. And, and how they relied on him to do that. And he was, I had this funny quote from a podcast where he was saying, I was thinking to myself, I can take him. Yeah. I'll go in and I'll ask him. And so he just seems like he's got that self-deprecating humor, that quick wit that endeared Jacoby Brissett to the Browns. I mean, he just seems like he has those, just that magnetic personality. And I think they need that. That's what I think this broken defense needs right now. Somebody to pull them together, to pull the best out of them, and to see if they can't get them all going in the right direction again. So I really like what I've read so far about Jerod Mayo. And then when I think about Jim Schwartz, I knew him back in, when he was here in the Bill Belichick era. I didn't know him really well back then, but I knew of him and he knew of me. And, he was in the personnel department back then. And, he's a no nonsense guy. He's tough nosed. He's got tons of experience. And I think he's got the same kind of leadership qualities that this defense really needs. I haven't really done all of my due diligence yet on Sean Desai, who's now with the Seahawks, or Brian Flores, who is now with the Steelers. So just starting to really do a lot of homework on these guys, but they've got some really good candidates. And I think that might be the number one thing, is to pull these guys together and be able to get the best out of each and every one of them.
Yeah, going back to what you said about, not being able to handle the hiring process because you like all these people because, as it turns out, a lot of these coaches that end up getting coordinator interviews are really ambitious and they're great leaders and they know football really well. And it's like, oh yeah, of course I'd hire that guy. So I'm kind of the same way. You start to do research on these guys. It's like, oh yeah, of course that guy's going to be great. He's going to be the next Bill Belichick. So we had a question. Let's kind of keep going down the defensive coordinator road here. This comes from Mike in Chester, Maryland. Hey, Mary Kay, do you think the Browns are open to changing their defensive scheme in 2023 to align with the strengths of the players rather than making players adjust to their system? And I think this also includes, let's say Brian Flores sits down and says, this is the defense I want to run, and it's a little different than what you guys do. Would they be willing to make those adjustments?
I think so. I think they are open to whatever they can do to make this defense as good as it can get. And I mean, you don't necessarily want to completely overhaul your whole roster. And I don't think they'll have to do that. I think they've got enough versatility amongst most of their defensive players, that they should be able to adapt. I mean, whether or not in the back end, if you want to play, more Tampa 2, or if you want to play, more man coverage or whatever you want to do, I think they've got the guys to be able to do that on the back end. The front is where you usually have some differences in philosophy, whether you go 3-4, 4-3, whether you go bigger linebackers, and those kinds of things are a little bit different. But I think that they're going to pick the coordinator and let him put in place the defense. And I think that they will be able to adapt most of what they have to what the coordinator wants. And then they can go out and they can fill in the parts and the pieces, because they're going to have to do that anyways. They've got to get some defensive tackles, and they might have to get some linebackers. So, why not let the coordinator that you love and that the team falls in love with run his game, whatever that is.
And one of the things Andrew Berry said yesterday is, they're going to pick players, they're going to sign players to support the coach. That's sort of how they view this process. And so that includes the defensive coordinator. So if they hire a guy who maybe wants a more traditional looking Mike linebacker, then that suddenly becomes a priority in the offseason. Or, if he wants big Andrew Billings type defensive tackles like that, those things become a priority in the offseason all of a sudden. So I think they're going to do whatever they need to do. And I think you're right. When it comes to the back end, especially at corner, their job is always kind of the same anyway. It's just cover. And they might be better man corners anyway than they are zone corners. There's little stuff like that, but ultimately their job is usually the same in most schemes.
Yeah. And again, this is a personnel department that has put a premium on the versatility of players, so that your linebackers can drop into coverage and can stop the run. And, traditionally, they've been a little bit smaller than what has been beneficial, but maybe that holds up if you add to the defensive tackle pile. So, I think the defensive coordinator that comes in here is going to really have to take I'm back to taking unflinching looks at things. But I think that new defensive coordinator is going to have to take an unflinching look at the personnel that they have and be honest about it and say, hey, this isn't going to work. You guys play in the AFC North, against the run heavy Baltimore Ravens, and you're not going to be able to stop that run with this kind of philosophy. So this is how we need to do it. That coordinator is going to really have to tell it like it is. And that's what everybody in this whole organization is going to have to start to do. People have got to stop being afraid to express themselves. Even John Johnson III yesterday mentioned that in his exit meetings, he kind of held back a little bit because, he's learned that you don't necessarily want to say too much. But I think it's time for people to say too much or to say enough. And that is going to be Deshaun when he sits down with Kevin Stefanski to talk about the offense. That's the defensive coordinators that come in and talk about what they want to run. That is going to be the players that in their exit meetings try to tell Kevin and Andrew what they think this team needs to be better. So I think, the time for holding things in, that ship has sailed.
And the people they're talking to have to be willing to listen. Even if it goes against their philosophy a little bit, even if it makes them a little uncomfortable, they've got to be really open-minded and they've got to be willing to listen. And that's sort of what if you're going to be a smart analytics-driven organization, you've got to be open to a ton of ideas like that. That's sort of how the Browns paint themselves, and they have to live that too, not just talk about it.
Yeah, because I've asked a couple different guys, this season, have you brought that up? Have you talked about that? And a lot of times the answer is no. And so I don't know if they just feel like they're not going to be heard or if they're afraid to rock the boat. But I'll tell you what, even in just doing this Gerard Mayo story that I just did, he wasn't afraid to speak his mind to Bill Belichick. And that is like going into the lion's den. So if he could do that with Bill Belichick, certainly these players could do that with Kevin Stefanski, with whoever the new defensive coordinator is, with Andrew Berry, without fear that they are going to be hurting themselves or their future. They've got to speak up. There are too many issues on this team right now related to communication, and it has to get better.
All right, question here about the defensive staff. This comes from Jim in Talmadge. Hey, Mary Kay, will the new defensive coordinator be allowed to clean house with his people, or will the Browns insist some are kept?
I don't know if insist is the right word, because if you want to attract the best defensive coordinators, and there will be competition for their services, if you're getting guys in here, the caliber of what we're talking about, they will have other opportunities. So I don't think you can insist that they do anything, but I think you can encourage them and supply them with some good information, some good due diligence, and let them know that, hey, these are the coaches that we really feel did a phenomenal job with their parts of the defense this year, and we would like to keep them if possible. Or, players really feel they can confide in this coach, or whatever the case may be. I think there will be strong suggestions made to the new defensive coordinator, but I don't think that Kevin Stefanski will insist on anything.
Yeah, I mean, you have to let him bring in the guys that he trusts and people that he knows he can work with. You can't. What have we talked about with this organization forever and ever? It's just throwing people together that maybe shouldn't be working together. So if there's a position coach that he really wants, then you got to let him have that person. It's just sort of, you made the decision to fire Joe, and now, unfortunately, and it's tough to talk about flippantly because these are humans and they have families. A lot of them have families and kids, and it's tough. They're all kind of on pins and needles right now, trying to figure out what they're going to be doing next. Moving, changing schools, all that stuff. But it's also the reality of the NFL. You have to let a new D coordinator bring in his people and make an assessment of the people in your building and decide who he wants to keep.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's going to be imperative. I mean, Kevin Stefanski would not want to run an offense with guys that were forced upon him, right? He wouldn't want to do that. He would want to make sure he's surrounded by people that he feels extremely comfortable with, guys that think the way that he does, guys that he can work with and spend all those hours and hours and hours in the meeting rooms together. Even that, I think, is a skill to set up a coaching staff, at least on either side of the ball, that it's got a little bit of humor, that it's got a little bit of toughness, that it's got some guys that are not yes men. Just in the same way that you have to set up your roster that way with, some leaders and some guys that keep things light and some guys that are old school. In the same way, I think you need that on your coaching staff. I think it's good to have some wise old sages. I think it's good to have some good young guys that are entry level and bring fresh new ideas. Some people that are a little serious, maybe someone that, can crack up the room. So I would think that the defensive coordinator should have full authority to set up that defensive staff the way that he wants to.
All right, let's switch gears here. We got a lot of questions about Kevin Stefanski, and we will start with Megan in Pittsburgh. Hey, Mary Kay, why should fans believe that Kevin Stefanski, quote, taking a long, hard look at the offense is going to lead to fewer head-scratching moments in game? She will never get over calling deep passes back-to-back on 3rd and 2 and 4th and 2 in minus 20 degrees and high winds, and doesn't understand why that kind of decision requires unpacking later. She doesn't know if he can take this team where it wants to go. I guess that's not really a question, but that's sort of the vibe I got reading through some of the Kevin Stefanski questions we got. Do you think Kevin Stefanski can get this offense figured out?
Well, I think Kevin Stefanski deserves an opportunity to call plays for the elite quarterback that the Browns have just gone out and acquired in Deshaun Watson. I think that it's too soon to pull the plug on him before anyone can see what he can do with Deshaun Watson. And we also know that Deshaun told us that a reason why he came here was because of Kevin Stefanski, because of the talk that they had about football when the Browns went down to Houston to try to court him last March. So he's one of the reasons that he's here. He feels like he can talk to Kevin Stefanski about the offense. He plans to talk to him more. And when he said he wants to talk to him man to man, I think in some ways it may have been perceived as Some of it looked like, when you see it on social media that, he's going to sit Kevin Stefanski down and tell him like it is, tell him what the deal is. And that's really not what he meant at all. This was, hey, let's put our heads together. Let's collaborate on this. Let's just put it all out on the table, man to man, not I need to tell him, how this is going to be done. That's not what that was all about. But I do think that Kevin deserves a chance to see what he can do when he's got the quarterback to run the things that he wants to run. And he's learned, he's educated himself too. And I've always said this about him. And it really is almost a Tene or a Jesuit thing to have that growth mindset. It's instilled in him to definitely be all about growth and learning and open to new things. And he is that. And I think that in addition to everything that he's learned from the coordinators that he's worked with in his career, I think he's talked to coaches that have coached Deshaun Watson to find out more about what makes him tick and what he does well. And I think he'll be really, really open to what Deshaun has to say and to Deshaun's input. And as we could hear, Deshaun plans to take plenty of ownership over this offense and be all about it. And once again, communication is key. It didn't happen enough under, Kevin Stefanski and Baker Mayfield. For whatever reason, Baker harbored feelings of, I don't like how I'm being used. My strengths aren't being showcased. But that didn't seem to somehow get articulated to Kevin Stefanski. That all has to change. I mean, if Deshaun sees something, he's got to say, hey, we need 2 new receivers or whatever the case may be. We need to run 11 personnel. We need to have more elements of, the spread, whatever the case may be. We need to run more no huddles so that I can be more involved in kind of running the show when I'm out there. Whatever he wants and needs is what he needs to say, and he needs to say it loud and clear, and then they need to go from there.
So I'm glad you brought up the man-to-man thing, because I thought that was interesting. And I agree with you. I think when you see it on social media, it's like, whoa, there's like tension here. These guys don't like each other. I do think it's an interesting way to put it, though. And it at least sort of, I guess I perk up a little hearing it. Like, not that there's a disconnect, not trying to create anything, but I do think it's an interesting way to say it. And it makes me think that, Deshaun's got some ideas of what he wants to do, and they're probably a little bit different than what we saw in those last 6 games. That maybe there's a little more they have to work out. I just thought it was an interesting choice of words, and I think he did it. He said it after the game, and he said it again on Monday, right? He used the man-to-man phrase.
I can't remember if he did it after the game or not.
I'll check the transcripts, but I
can't remember. But he was, he was all about that yesterday, and it also came in the context of, hey, I'm not necessarily going to tell you guys here what it is I'm thinking. I'm going to talk man-to-man to my coach about it. This is not the place for me to say how I think things are going to be different or how I want things to be different on this offense. That's kind of between Kevin and I is where I think he was going with that. You know what I mean? It wasn't I'm going to sit him down and I'm going to tell him what we need to do. It wasn't like that. Deshaun's not like that. It will be a collaborative effort, but he will express himself, and he should express himself. And if it requires a drastic change, then say it. Get it out now. Talk about it. Take an unflinching look at what needs to happen, and don't wait until Game 6 next season to say, yeah, you know what? I really felt, I've been feeling like this since, January, that we should have done things this way. Don't do that. I mean, get it out now. Put it all out on the table. Put your cards all out on the table. Kevin, put your cards out on the table. Alex Van Pelt, all of you. And Kevin did say, and he always says this, but I really do believe he means it, that he would be open to someone else calling the plays if it makes sense for somebody else to do that. And I don't know if anything has changed from any other year about that when he has sort of said the same thing, because now they do have, a different sort of quarterback. They've got a dual threat quarterback, and there might be somebody out there who actually would be better at handling the play calling and giving Kevin Stefanski an opportunity to oversee the whole process. I don't know if he means that seriously or if it's just, that he would be open to it if the situation arises. I don't know that I don't know that change is underfoot in terms of the play calling situation at this point.
So the assumption there for most people would be you'd hand it to Alex Van Pelt, but is there a possibility that if he handed over play calling, it could be to someone not in the building right now?
I think so. I mean, I think they would be open to anything that can improve the team. And if they feel there is someone out there, that they could hire that can handle a quarterback like this better than they can, then I think they'll be open to it. Again, I haven't gotten the impression that that's the case. We heard Andrew Berry say again yesterday that he likes the pairing between Kevin Stefanski and Deshaun Watson. So I think the goal and the plan is for them to move forward as play caller and quarterback. But, with all these staff changes that are happening right now and all these coaches that are getting fired and everything that's shaking up all over the league, I mean, if they as an organization discover that someone who can do that job better than Kevin Stefanski becomes available, he should be open to it. They should all be open to it.
All right, let's take a break. We've got Hey Mary Kay questions still to go here on the other side, including one regarding Ashley. I know Ashley listens, even when she's not on the podcast. So, Ashley, we've got a question about you from one of our Hey Mary Kay text subscribers. So that's going to come up after the break. First of all, though, I got to talk to Lance Reisland. We looked back on the Steelers game, got into a little bit of the play calling and stuff like that. And then on the other side of that, we'll continue with some Hey Mary Kay questions.
NIL Now, a podcast dedicated to the name, image, and likeness of today's college and high school athletes.
NIL is not a cherry on top. It needs to be thought about as a part of these young men and women's future, as a nest egg for something when something goes wrong. There's less than 1% of these football players make it to the NFL. Their plan B is sometimes not as lofty as plan A. This NIL thing, when you ask what's the next important thing, is to make sure that these players are coming to school for education, sports, but also NIL is a close third in that. It's an investment into these players now that they can take advantage of or leverage their name, image, and likeness to, further their careers. So now you have a nest egg after you've invested so much time into your skill set in college. You should be able to leave college with something.
This is NIL Now.
Welcome back to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. We are now joined, as we are every week, by Lance Reisland for the final time looking back at a football game from Sunday. The Browns losing to the Steelers 28-14. And Lance, every week you text me your key points. And as I was reading this first one, you and I had the same thought watching that game about the identity of the offense. What were you seeing with this team?
Well, you've seen it ever since Watson got back, so it's been 6 weeks, and they just really, really struggle. First of all, non-schematically, they just lack passion. They lack enthusiasm. They lack energy. And then schematically, they're kind of reaching. And as a coordinator, when I was calling plays, there's a difference between calling plays and running an offense. And with Stefanski's offense over the years, you always felt there was a reason and a purpose. One play was going to set up another play, was going to set up plays for future games. It all came off that play action. They've kind of devised their roster in such a way where their run game is the primary thing. And then all of a sudden it changed, and they don't look in sync whatsoever. And for me, before schematically, it really starts with their energy and passion.
With Watson, that was a game where, again, it sort of went back, it felt like, too. And he was under pressure a lot. Some of it was self-inflicted. It felt like he kind of went back to that backyard football mode that he had a little bit in Cincinnati, kind of in Houston. It just felt like, I don't know. I guess I don't know how to describe it. He threw the 2 interceptions. He did a lot of running around. It felt like he had been making progress, really sort of settling in and finding his footing in the pocket. And I felt like maybe this had a lot to do with the Steelers. It felt like that went away in this game.
Well, I think it had a lot to do with the Steelers front and how they're getting after him. But more importantly, I just think that there's a classic example of what are they going to do moving forward, because that offensive line, I've heard a lot of people talk about Teller and pass protection. Well, I like the fact that I get to, I was there for all of camp and I got to see them practice, and they are not a traditional practice pass sets over and over and over. West Coast, air raid, all this stuff. They are a power run football team, and that's a big difference for an offensive lineman. So what I see in terms of protection, I think those guys can get it. I think they're fantastic. That's just not what they've had to do. And for me, it looked like they became a drop back team. With run-type linemen, and the scheme and schematics just don't match right now.
Also, I think it's difficult the Browns were passing the ball a lot in that game. And, we talk about this every week, I feel like. But there were a lot of dropbacks in that game. And Joel Bitonio even mentioned it afterwards. There were a lot of dropbacks, and it just that can be hard on an offensive lineman.
Well, if you think about it in terms of how they pass block, so even when you go back to Baker and when Jacoby is in there, so you have play action, and so those defensive linemen do a great job of reading what the offensive lineman is doing, and the Browns do an incredible job of showing run first. Now, when you show run first, you get the reaction you want in terms of stopping the run from the defensive lineman. Then they get into pass protection. Now you're getting the old adage of pin your ears back and go. Now they know that. Now they're jumping in gaps. Now there's no threat of the run, which is going to change how you pass it. Those guys now, they've really done a great job over the last couple of years of showing that run first, then getting into their pass set, but almost using their run sets and their outside zone as kind of the primary way to get started in their pass protection. And it's just something they're going to have to, if that's what they're going to do moving forward, then that's how they're going to have to practice, which is going to hurt the run game.
Now, when you looked at the defense, there was a drive that stood out to you. It was the one where the Steelers went up 28-14. Tell me what you saw on that drive.
We had 3 third downs, and I broke down those third down plays. And the first one was a back shoulder fade on Emerson with Pickens, and they really liked that matchup. He only had 3 catches, but they really liked that matchup. They were trying to find that matchup. To me, that was a matchup. They liked it. Good play both sides. No big deal. Then you had a 3rd and 8. The Browns had an injury. You had a 3rd and 8, and they got a 27-yard completion. You had an injury to Ward. You had Newsome on the outside. Now you had Green on the inside. He was on Hayward. Now, this is when it comes down to coaching. I thought this was very, very well done by Woods and his staff at this point. So they had Hayward in the slot. They were in a man under 2 deep, and those 2 safeties helped on Pickens. So you had Pickens and Deontay Johnson on the outside. Johnson helped on Johnson, and Delpit helped over the top of Pickens on the top, and it kind of left Green one-on-one. So that's not a schematic thing. That's not poor coaching. Okay, that's a guy getting beat. So that's a personnel thing. So I thought they did a really good job on that particular play. Now they had a little attention to detail. The one that bothered me was the 3rd and 8 down to the 3-yard line. It doesn't get any easier for a quarterback. So you had this was on Delpit for me, not Green. So they did a little token motion that everybody does in the NFL, and they brought that guy back in the backfield. That was Warren. That showed Pickett it was zone coverage. From that point on, the play was over. And why? Because Green was aligned outside of Hayward. Now, with Hayward being outside, with Green being outside, he thought Delpit was going to help him because the field was reduced in the red zone. That's attention to detail. Delpit's way too deep there. Johnson and Delpit were way too deep. So all they did was they took Gentry and they crossed the face of Jones, and it left that middle wide open. And the reason it was open is because that's attention to detail. Green thought Delpit was going to help because they were reduced down on the goal line. And right when they brought Warren back in the backfield and Pickett knew it was zoned, that play was over. And that's an attention to detail. So the play before I thought was a little bit more on player. That one was a little bit of coach, or the safety's not lining up where they were told to line up.
Okay, quick little detour here before we continue to talk about the defense, because you mentioned the name that drives Ashley and me both crazy, George Pickens. Both of us really liked Pickens, and both of us we certainly weren't the only ones. I think Doug liked him. There were a lot of people that liked Pickens. We thought he would be, obviously personality-wise, some of that stuff was out there, but this is a guy that just was a playmaker, and because of that stuff, maybe you can get him at 44, and the Browns obviously decided not to do that, and the Steelers end up with him. If he stays right, if he, and Mike Tomlin is so good at managing people, if he stays right, man, he could come back and haunt this team for a long time. He is really good. And I thought he showed us, even with only 3 catches, I thought he showed us and continues to show that ability that he brings to a passing game.
Well, 2 things. First of all, I couldn't agree with you more. He's an extreme talent, but you see what an elite receiver can do, even if they only have 3 catches. It's the perception of him being out there and what you have to do as a defense to stop him. So you know that he's out there. You know you have to slide coverage to him. You know you have to help. So with him and Deontay Johnson, that's what gave Hayward that big seam shot for 27 yards. But, yeah, he's good at all 3 levels. I liked him too. I remember, I didn't like him as much as I think I didn't like him as much as you guys, but now seeing him, he's really good at all 3 levels. Getting off the ball, the point of catch, and after catch, he's really good. And he's going to be a problem for years to come for sure.
And by the way, and this is not a dig at Kenny Pickett, but he's doing this with Kenny Pickett, who is, has been up and down. He's only coming into this game, he'd only thrown 6 touchdown passes. Like, Pickett is fine. He's not an elite quarterback. He's not, to do this with a rookie quarterback and also Mitch Trubisky too for part of the season, I just think it speaks to his talent. But what could have been? Point number 3 that you sent me was the defensive effort was a microcosm of the season, and it cost Joe Woods his job. Explain that.
Well, you had the inability to stop the run. So those guys had Harris and Warren had 29 for 120. But for me, it was more just the attitude and how they just took it right to the Browns when they needed to. And they got big runs. Again, they were 2nd and 5 a bunch, 2nd and 6 a bunch. And they just had an attitude that they were going to run right at the Browns. So you had that defensive tackle thing that we talked about. Me and you and Ashley and Mary Kay, and we've talked about it since camp, since way back in the summer. So that really, really showed its head in terms of being able to stop the run. Then you had a blown coverage, and the Browns, I went and watched it finally when I got the all-22, and they were in cover 4, and Johnson just doesn't drop for some reason. So again, and once again, I'm just saying his name because I know it looks like a cover 4, but is he messing up or is everybody else messing up? Because you don't really know now in terms of because there's so many breakdowns who the culprit is there. But there's an obvious breakdown because they're in quarters coverage and they got a quarter wide open. And just the inability to make the big play when they need to make a big play, when they need to get a stop. So as bad as that game was, especially from, when they scored a bunch of points there within a minute 9, all kind of stuff, they went down 20-14 and they just needed to get a stop and they couldn't do it. And they couldn't do it against a quarterback who had to make 3 third-down throws that were really, really difficult, and they just couldn't get it done. And it's kind of just I don't think it's all Woods. I don't think it's, I think obviously it all rolls downhill, but it was just kind of a microcosm of just giving up the blown coverage, not being able to stop the run, not being able to get a key stop when you need it, and just added up. And it was, you and I have had this conversation week after week.
Yeah, and like you said, now Joe Woods is out of a job, and the Browns are looking for a new defensive coordinator. You also mentioned defensive tackles are a bigger issue than people understand. I'm curious about that because, and first of all, go to Lance's Twitter at Lance Reisland. He wrote a story about some free agent defensive tackles that are out there. But I'm curious about that point because people know that these defensive tackles are bad. So why do you think it's worse than what people think?
Well, because I don't think, to be honest with you, I don't know how bad they are. It's the style. And me and you have talked about that before. They're one gap guys and they go with small linebackers. The style doesn't match the linebackers. So when I wrote about what they need, it's obviously you're going to read all those guys. I was thinking about you as I was getting them because they're all 330 plus. They're all just huge humans. I just wrote on some college kids as well. And they're all just big guys who absorb people. And what people don't understand is that is kind of the foundation. It's kind of the heart of the defense. And everything else can be shiny. The skin can be shiny. The other organs can be shiny. You can have all that stuff. But without the heart, and that heart is always, always, always those defensive tackles. Obviously, the Browns have had some elite defensive ends. But if you don't have tackles, it's play after play after play of getting down a distance that you need. Teams can control the ball. They can control the ball at the end of the game. They can continuously get first downs and keep your offense off the field. Those defensive tackles, it is a personnel issue. It's not an effort thing. I thought those guys played hard all the time. But I stick by kind of what we said earlier in the summer. This is a personnel issue. They don't have guys who take on blocks. They don't have guys who absorb doubles. They don't have guys who clog it up in there. And it is shown over and over how necessary that really is to be successful at that level, at all levels.
Yeah, and when you mention that heart, it's not just the linebackers, right? They open things up for linebackers, right? But they also, I'm a firm believer that really good defensive tackles help your edge rushers, even more so than just having two bookend edge rushers. When you have really good defensive tackles, and I've heard guys talk about this, if you've got really good defensive tackles, that can help free up a guy like Myles Garrett. That can help free up whoever you've got on that other edge. When you have guys that can take up blockers, and it helps if they can create pressure too, but just make it so much harder to double team.
Well, first of all, it's harder to double team. Secondly, you're going to get, if you have those big defensive tackles, you're going to get in the down and distance that allow those edge rushers to be successful. So that's what I always talk about. If you can stop the run, I had, a guy said, well, the guys you like are only first and second down guys. I'm good with that. I'm good with let's get it to third and long. Then you're using a secondary that you've invested a lot of money in. You're using Myles Garrett to his strength. When you don't get in second, if you don't get them behind the sticks, then you can't, if you don't get them off schedule, you can't use those guys. Those guys are nil and void. The secondary is nil and void, the edge rushers. So not only do they cause double teams, but they're going to get you in the down and distance that allow you to be successful as an edge rusher for sure.
Hey, you know what? I'll take some first and second down guys because there were some brutal first and second downs. We'll figure out third down, especially if it's 3rd and 8 or 3rd and 9 or 3rd and 13. We'll figure that out. I'll take some good first and second down guys.
Yeah, you need some guys. And I always say it's the boring guys. It's the guys that look like it. They look like they're hurting when they go out there. It looks like they're big and they're not creating any pressure. Their jersey barely fits. Those guys are so important in football, and the Browns just don't have them. Browns have guys who are really good. Now, those guys, a couple of those guys can be really good on third down. Those are the guys that can come in on after first and second down and create a great pass rush. But right now, they don't have any beef in there to take on those double teams.
Okay, that's Lance Reisland breaking down the Steelers game. Lance, this has been great doing this all season long. And as I mentioned before, this is not the last time we're going to hear Lance on the podcast. We're going to find plenty to keep you busy here this offseason as we head through free agency, the drafts, getting ready for the season, all of that. So I know a lot of people like hearing what Lance has to bring to this podcast. We're going to take a break. On the other side, we're going to do some Hey, Mary Kay questions from our Football Insider subscribers. Lance, thanks for the time.
As always, thanks for having me.
Welcome back to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast, the Hey Mary Kay edition. Thanks to Lance Reisland for joining us and giving us his look back on the Steelers. He's been great all year, taking time to do that. So now back to some Hey Mary Kay questions. Some of these were this is kind of what I put them in the random section. So this kind of covers a lot of different things. We start with Paxton Stiles from Cheverly, Maryland. Hey Mary Kay, do you think the Browns front office expected this to be a lost year once Deshaun Watson got suspended and they were just pretending to try to make the playoffs? Or do you think they actually thought they had a chance to make the playoffs?
I think they felt they actually had a chance to make the playoffs. You can't toss a season out the window when you've got all these players in the prime of their career. Joel Bitonio, Wyatt Teller, Nick Chubb, Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward. I mean, the list can go on and on and on. They've got a bunch of players that are ready to win right now. And I don't think that this, by any stretch of the imagination, was about punting on the season. I just don't believe that at all. I think they felt that Jacoby Brissett was an upgrade over Baker Mayfield and that the defense would play really well and that the special teams would play well. And that they would be able to hold down the fort until Deshaun got back. And I think some things just didn't go the way that they expected them to go. No one thought the defense was going to tank in the first half of the season. No one thought that the special teams would struggle as much as they did. And I don't think anyone really believed that Deshaun would be as rusty as he was. I mean, and I think, everyone underestimated just, the acclimation period to a new scheme, a new offense, new players, and all the things that it took for him to figure out in those final 6 games of the season. So I 100% think that they believed that they could win. I mean, not that they were going to go 15-2, but I think that they believed that they could win perhaps the 10 games it might need to contend for the playoffs.
I agree. I don't think they looked at this and said, well, it's over. And yeah, I've obviously been team no excuses all along, especially when you have, like, it's got to kill them to be seeing a team like Pittsburgh with Kenny Pickett, who is okay, and they didn't have TJ Watt for a long time, and they played a meaningful game in Week 18. And the Ravens, who knows what's going on with Lamar Jackson, but they've been in the playoffs, and I know the Jets got eliminated, but they were in the race for longer than the Browns were. The Dolphins are in the playoffs, and they've been dealing with Tua in and out of the lineup. It's got to be really disappointing to kind of look at some other teams who were in, frankly, worse situations than the Browns. And some of them managed to either make the playoffs or at least play meaningful games right up until the end of the season.
Yeah, and Dan, when you look at that lineup of quarterbacks that they played, I mean, they should have been able to beat, the Marcus Mariotas and the Joe Flaccos and the Bailey Zappies of the NFL. They should have been able to do that. There are enough really hard quarterbacks that you have to beat, that you certainly have to beat the average or below average guys. So that was such a concern. And again, I think it just illustrates why they felt they needed to do what they needed to do on defense. And they will quickly find out. They will probably fairly quickly find out if it was a lot more than just Joe Woods. And I think they acknowledged that it was a lot more than Joe Woods. And you wrote a column about that yesterday, too. There are personnel issues. There are culture issues. There are discipline issues. And it needs a nice overhaul over there. There are still some talented players, but, they need a new energy. They need a new vibe. They also need a bunch of guys coming back from injuries, too. I mean, I think it'll really help if JOK comes back strong, if Sione Taki comes back strong. Anthony Walker, we talked to him yesterday. He would like to be back. He's going to be a free agent. He's coming off a pretty serious injury. But if they can get some of these guys back, I think it really changes up what they can do much quicker. And,
I think just trying to kind of figure out this offense with Deshaun, like we talked about, that's really kind of what this is all. That's kind of the key to all of this, just making this work with Deshaun Watson. That's sort of the number one thing with getting this thing turned around. But just a really disappointing season, I think. And I was glad that they didn't kind of hide from that and just try to pin it all on Joe Woods yesterday.
Yeah, they did not hide from that. And, I walked away from all of yesterday, from the exit meetings and from the exit interview, the season ending press conference that we had with Andrew and Kevin. And I can't honestly say I walked out of there thinking, 2023 is definitely going to be a playoff season. I didn't feel that way. Now, things can change over the offseason, and a lot does need to change, in my opinion. I do think that they need to add some good receivers. I think you really need to support Deshaun in that way. You can't really have guys coming up the learning curve and expect that he's just going to elevate the play of everyone. I think he needs to find ways to get rid of the ball much quicker. And of course, that will be easier if you're looking out there and guys are open or you have more talent amongst the pass catchers. Again, defensively, you've got to go out and you've got to spend some money to get a good defensive tackle. And there are some that are going to be available on the open market. So you got to get at least one or two of those guys. You've got to, again, change up the philosophy and the energy on defense to bring out the best in all these guys that you thought were going to be so good. You have to make some decisions on some high-priced players like John Johnson III, who has a $13.5 million cap number for next season. Again, there are June 1st considerations with JJ3. If you do anything before June 1st, you really can't, because your dead cap would be more than $12 million. If you wait until after June 1st, your dead cap is only $3.75 million. So there might be something like that that has to be discussed. But there will be change. There will definitely be change. And they really have to get it right because they cannot waste another $46 million season of Deshaun Watson's.
Okay, mini rant. Can we stop talking about this team winning press conferences, please? Especially when they're on January 9th and It's a season-ending press conference. Can neither of us, I'm not talking to either of us, but just can we just stop with the, Browns won a press conference, or man, they were really impressive in that press conference and they really controlled that room, and who cares?
Yeah. That doesn't matter. I mean, that doesn't matter. The things that matter, as we now know, are communication, discipline, and really good players. That's what you need. Discipline, communication, and good players at most of the key spots. And if they fix those three things, then they should be back in business next year.
Yes, they can get back to winning games, which is kind of the point of all of this. Okay, a few more questions here. This one has to do with Jedrick Wills. It comes from Carloso in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Hey, Mary Kay, how long can the Browns go with the 45th rated left tackle? I'm assuming he's talking about PFF grade here. Wills is hardly a young player by NFL years, and he doesn't think it's likely he will improve dramatically in his fourth year. What do you think the future is here he has a future here. What do you think it holds for him, though, long-term here?
Well, the first thing the Browns must do is make the decision on whether or not they're going to pick up his fifth-year option for 2024. And in the category that Jed Wills is in, a first-round player that has not made a Pro Bowl, that number for an offensive lineman should be in the $14 million range. I don't think that's too much money at all to spend on Jed Wills in 2024. Because remember, each year the prices are going to go up at every position anyways. So if you pick that up and it's guaranteed right when you pick it up in, the first week in May, when you pick that up, you're kind of stuck with it. But I think it's worth developing him again this year and for that season. And then if you decide that you don't want to extend him and give him that long-term extension that you're eligible to give him, then you can take these next 2 years and see where you're at and see if he is exactly what you need at left tackle and see if he can keep coming up the learning curve, because he does get better every year. Last year, he was really hampered by an ankle injury. He made strides this year. So that's what you want to do. You want to keep developing him, and you want to see if he can get to that level where you want him to be. And you really want him to be at a Pro Bowl level. That's what you are aiming for when you pick a guy number 10 overall. So he's got a little ways to go, but he did make progress this year. And I think now they've got 2 more seasons to determine, if he is their guy long term. If not, then you start thinking about what else you might want to do there. But I do think that they will be inclined to pick up the fifth-year option by May.
And I think one of the lessons from this year is, see if you can go out there and find an affordable backup plan. You did it at center actually this year. That was sort of like the shining example. Nick Harris was going to be your guy. You went out and you signed Ethan Posick, obviously a guy you liked. And when Nick got hurt on the second play of preseason, you had a guy who was able to step in. And there were other positions where they, continued down the road with young guys, but maybe they didn't have that really solid backup plan. So maybe that's the approach is, you stick with Jed, which makes sense. You continue to see if he can develop. And you just make sure you find some value at that, find some tackle, a swing tackle, whoever. And of course you have James Hudson too in the building. Just somebody, just in case Jed takes a step back and it doesn't work out.
Yes, absolutely. It's such an important position. And once again, you are talking about protecting the franchise now. You've got a $230 million quarterback who, by the way, has a tendency to hang on to that ball until the very last second trying to make a play or to be scrambling around. It's a challenging thing to try to block for. And, you're going to have to find, these guys are going to have to be able to adapt to how do you block for Deshaun? How do you protect him? How do you make sure that you're where you need to be when he takes off and he starts running around, or he's holding the ball a little bit longer than you were used to? So it's vitally important that he's protected. It's also vitally important that that he does learn to get rid of the ball quicker, because you're putting yourself in harm's way when you're getting sacked that much. He was sacked 20 times in his 6 games, and that includes 7 times against the Pittsburgh Steelers. That can't happen. Okay, I mean that just cannot happen. You have to pull that apart and figure out what that was all about. And I think some of it was, him just really forcing it a little bit and trying to make a play. So they've got to look at that tape and try to figure out, how do we make sure that this doesn't happen again? Because when you are, getting hit like that many times by that level of talent, one of these times you're not going to get up feeling very good. And so they've got to be very careful and protect that investment in any way that they possibly can.
2 more here. The first one, this is going to make us rack our brains a little bit. This comes from Mike in Bay Village. Hey, Mary Kay, what was the biggest mistake you made in evaluating the Browns prospects this year? And what was the most important non-obvious thing you got right? So I know the thing I got wrong. Well, I got a lot of things wrong. I'm going to throw out Jacoby Brissett. I think I was wrong about Jacoby Brissett. I thought it was going to be pretty rough. And he wasn't perfect, but for who he is, he came out and had a career year, and this offense looked pretty good with him at quarterback. So that was definitely something that I got wrong about Jacoby. I was really nervous about how this thing was going to look with him.
Yeah. I would have to say that he exceeded my expectations too. But I think more so than anything for me is I overrated the defense. I really thought and it wasn't just one player. I really believed that these young guys in particular, this is what I had been saying, and this is what I believed was going to happen, that the young guys, the Greg Newsoms, the JOKs, the Jordan Elliott's, the Grant Delpits were going to really step it up. I thought that maybe 1 or 2 of them would even have a Pro Bowl caliber season. Instead, almost everyone on the defense, basically except for Myles Garrett, regressed. Everyone regressed. Think about that. Jadeveon Clowney went from 9 sacks down to 2. Greg Newsome didn't love his transition to having to play nickelback. Denzel Ward went from being the 15th ranked quarterback in the NFL, according to Pro Football Focus, to the 45th ranked cornerback in the NFL, according to PFF. JOK went from being the 10th ranked linebacker in the NFL down to, I can't remember where he ended up, but it wasn't anywhere near the top 10. So all of these guys that I thought were going to really step up, pick up where they left off last season when they had a really nice second half of last season, it just went in the opposite direction. It went in the reverse. And I'm still shocked about it. I still have a hard time believing why that happened like that. I still don't really get it. I still feel like I need to ask some of those questions of people, because I don't know. I just don't really understand why that happened. And of course, the hope on their part now is that it was schematic, and it was, coaching, and it was chemistry, and again, discipline, and all those things that we're talking about, because they truly believe that these are still really talented players that are going to play well for them going forward. That was the thing that I got completely wrong, and I apologize for that. I thought it was. You
know what though? We all got the defense wrong.
Yeah.
We all did.
Yeah, based on what I saw of just, JOK and Greg alone, I really thought that they would step up in their second seasons, hit the ground running, and be really, really amazing this year. And I think they still have it in them. I know they still have it in them, but it just didn't get pulled out right this year. And so that they have to, as Kevin Stefanski always says, they got to pull it apart and figure out what the heck went wrong. I wish he would let us be in some of those film sessions, pulling it apart. He should give us a day in the film room with him like that. That would be cool. So that was that. And then the second half of that question is, did I get something right that wasn't completely obvious? I have to think about that one for a minute.
The not completely obvious part is tough. I don't know. Maybe we should just bag that part here without too much prep work to think about it. There's a few.
Do you have one? Can you think of yours for that one?
I think, and this is one that you and I discussed this a lot. We both thought this team was short on receivers.
Yeah, right.
And that ended up being true.
Yes.
David Njoku didn't get his 8 touchdowns, but he had a good year.
Yes. Okay. Maybe I'll take a little bit of the David Njoku. He didn't finish as strong as he should have. And the 8 touchdowns were not supposed to happen in a year when Deshaun Watson only played 6 games. The 8 touchdowns are when Deshaun and David are together for the whole season. So I'm going to save the 8 TDs for next year. But he did play at a Pro Bowl caliber level for much of the season if you factor in his blocking. And he is a Pro Bowl alternate and might actually end up going to the big games, the flag football game. So I will take credit for that one because I sometimes feel like I've been out on an island with thinking that David Njoku is good, and he still has a ways to go. There were times this year where he regressed a little bit in games. But again, there was that transition from one quarterback to the next. I think that was hard on everybody, probably harder on everybody than anybody thought it was going to be. But I think that is maybe, just a less obvious thing that I feel like I got right, that he could play at that level.
All right, here's our last question. This is a question that was promised earlier, and it's actually not a question. It comes from Joel in Sacramento, who says, no question here, but hey, Mary Kay, I think the worst part of Sunday's loss is this. If the Browns had won, they would have finished 3rd in the division, and you would have been planning a trip to Las Vegas with Ashley in 2023. Is that the greatest failure of the Browns' 2022 season?
Oh my gosh. I mean, do not think that we have not already discussed this and lamented this. We were all looking forward to that trip to Las Vegas. Now, people probably might have like a different vision in their minds of why I would want to go to Las Vegas. You might have, just these, ideas of wild partying and things like that. But that's not really it for me. And I don't really think that would be it for Ashley either. We like really good shows. We like really good shopping. And we like really, really good dining. And so I think that's, what we would have been all about. Where Dan would have been in the casinos all night, we probably wouldn't have done that. But we nevertheless would have had a great time in Vegas, and I am mourning the loss of that opportunity.
I'll just say this. Sitting next to Ashley for the last week or so, I think she might spend the whole weekend in a sports book.
Yeah, we've started something dangerous, right? I mean, she did not really know how to talk betting, and I had to figure out how to talk betting too, a couple of years ago when we started doing our pods. Where we discussed all the, the bets and the lines and all that kind of stuff. And she was kind of back there where I was then a couple of years ago when I just didn't understand it very well. But she's getting it now. She's getting it, and she's getting into it. So hopefully she doesn't, hopefully we don't have to get her some help in the off season.
We're guiding her along. We're keeping her safe. That's our job. That's what we're supposed to do, which we would have done had we gotten to go to Vegas in 2023. But alas, we have to wait until 2024 to make that trip. Okay, that'll do it for this edition of the Orange and Brown Talk podcast, the Hey Mary Kay edition. Those questions came from our Football Insider subscribers. They are our texters. They also get a newsletter delivered to their inbox every day, and they get access to exclusive stories on cleveland.com/Browns. So just head to cleveland.com/Browns, click the blue banner on the top of the page to get info and get signed up. And also subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, where you can leave us a 5-star review, Spotify, and if you prefer YouTube, search Cleveland Browns on cleveland.com. To find our YouTube channel. There's a lot more than just the podcast on there. You won't regret subscribing to that if you're a YouTube person. I don't know if that's the right term. But anyway, Thanks to Mary Kay. Thanks to Lance. That'll do it. Mary Kay, I'll talk to you later.
Sounds great.